Okay, and we are rolling. So, hello folks, welcome. As you're getting logged in, we're going to just give it a minute and wait for everybody to get into the room, as it were. But if you're here looking for the Eastman Admissions webinar series, you're in the right place. And tonight's topic is the Music Teaching and Learning Department, which houses the music education degrees at Eastman. So welcome everyone. Looks like got a nice little crowd already. So for starters, I'm going to just lay out a couple of, I don't want to call them ground rules, but just how this will work as a webinar. For one thing, I'd love to invite the attendees as you arrive to introduce yourself in the chat. So I've just enabled the chat for attendees. So go ahead and say hi, tell us where you're from, and maybe what instrument you're pursuing. And we'll leave that chat open for a little bit just for introductions. And then after a little bit, we're going to turn the chat off and use the Q&A for actually answering your questions. So as you have questions, go ahead and put them into the Q&A. If we don't answer your questions immediately, we will, don't despair, we will get to them. You know, I'll just try to, my role here is to sort of host and feed questions to my guest, who I will introduce in a moment. And we will certainly leave time at the end to play catch up on any questions that we haven't gotten to along the way. Okay, so thank you all for joining us. Welcome again. We are here for the Eastman Admissions webinar on the Music Teaching and Learning Department. I should also mention that this webinar is being recorded, so if you need to step away or you find it just so helpful that you want to share it with all your friends, we will make it available afterwards. So I am here tonight with an Eastman faculty member named Christopher Azera, and Professor Azera is a pianist, arranger, educator. He has made many important contributions to advancing the understanding of creativity and improvisation in the music teaching and learning process. We're going to talk a little bit about that later on. And he is professor of music teaching and learning at Eastman. Also worth mentioning that he's an affiliate. He has an affiliate appointment in the jazz department. He's a quite accomplished jazz pianist. And also holds both his master's and PhD. Is that right? From the Eastman School.
That's right.
So welcome, Professor Azera.
Thanks for having me.
Who I will refer to as Chris throughout the evening, but of course, if you see him on the street, it's Professor Azera. And yeah, so to get us started, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do in your role at Eastman, and also for you, what kind of distinguishes the Music Teaching and Learning Department at Eastman?
Well, thanks so much for inviting me to do this tonight. I'm very honored and happy to participate. My role at Eastman is as a professor in the Music Teaching and Learning Department relates to instrumental music primarily, but I have opportunities to work with all the majors regardless of your emphasis, because of my interest in developing your musicianship as a obviously a performer and as a music teacher. One of my most favorite courses actually is teaching the introduction course. I get to teach the Intro to Music Teaching and Learning course. I work with every student in our major, and we also have students from outside of our major take that course. And my responsibilities range from doing that to doing courses for sophomores, juniors, and seniors in music teaching and learning. I also work with graduate students, because at Eastman we offer a master's and also a DMA and a PhD. So I have doctoral students and master students that I work with. And my primary emphasis or interest is in creativity, how it relates to improving your musicianship, how it relates to expressing yourself as a musician, and any connections we can make to becoming a better reader. How can we connect creativity and improvisation and composition and those kinds of questions? So Eastman is the perfect place for me because it has such a rich variety of students that come to the school. That's when people ask me what's the best part about teaching at Eastman, I always tell them that it's the students. So that sort of gives you a little sense of what I do in our department. Our department is distinctive. I'm fond of telling people that our department is distinctive because of our emphasis on musicianship. And the Eastman School of Music is a unique music school where you will have a terrific experience as a musician, player, singer, instrumentalist, whatever your emphasis is for your instrument or voice. And those students who study with us have a curiosity about teaching and learning. And the environment in Eastman is really a great fertile soil for learning all things musical for your own development as a musician. And then as you start to work in our department, we help you understand how that relates to teaching and learning with others. And the primary reason we have our name, Teaching and Learning, is because we are all learners, and potentially there are teachers in all of us that can hopefully interact with others and wake up the gifts that are inside and bring them out as we learn and grow. So I think that sort of describes our distinctiveness in the sense that it's very, very musical. You get this Eastman experience as a musician coupled with high musical content in our department for music education.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. So you really hit on kind of how, you know, it's really both things we're looking for. It kind of leads to the next question that I wanted to ask you, which is, you know, kind of what we're looking for in a prospective student and an applicant. And you've hit on some of that already. You know, this sort of combination of the performer, person who wants to share music as a performing artist, but the teacher who, you know, the person who also wants to share that with others through teaching.
Right.
How does your department assess music education applicants?
Well, we are positioned very well because we have such great colleagues across the school. Typically what happens with undergraduates is that they take an audition and meet their studio teacher. And then as we get involved in the application process, each student interviews personally with a faculty member. And we're very, we're really proud of that because we feel like that's a good way for students to really experience Eastman and to understand where we come from, and we get to meet people right up front at the beginning. And so there's an interview that you do, and the interview is just a question of how can you just be yourself and talk about your experiences and your enthusiasm for going to music school and studying music and music education, let's say. So we have the element of your audition on your instrument, we have the element of an interview, and then part of what we were talking about before about our distinctive position in the world of music schools is that we have you take a musicianship skills exam. And really what that's about is developing your ear, and the idea that singing and playing an instrument is an extension of your mind, body, and spirit. And we're really trying to get at your musical, the musical things that are happening for you that inform your playing and your reading and your, say, your improvising or your composing. One of the things that I had prepared for today was a sort of an overview of that musicianship skills exam. So Matthew, when you're ready, I can show them some of that and why we do that.
Yeah, I think that would be great. Why don't we do that now? And then that can lead into some other topics, I think.
Right. So the first thing to remember about any kind of assessment that we do is that our primary purpose for doing it is to get to know you better. That the idea would be that we're trying to find out what your individual strengths are, so we can ultimately, when you come to Eastman, be in a position to teach and work with you at a higher level because we know you better. And it also gives you a context for what I would like to think will be a good foundation for all of your application journey for all the schools you go to. So I think I'll share the screen and show you the place where you can find this musicianship skills exam, and I'll also give you a little intro into why we do it. So I'm going to share my screen. And you should see a slide here. It just says musicianship, and I call it the heart of music teaching and learning. And one of the things that I want you to understand is that as you learn and play the things that you've learned through reading, that one of the things you want to develop is how you can interact with what you're reading and understand it through your creativity and through your ability to express yourself in ways that go beyond the page. And so I have this quote from a woman named Jane Healy. The ability to bark at print is not reading, but many people, including well-meaning parents, think it is. And what she's saying is that if you can just pronounce the words on a page, it doesn't necessarily mean you comprehend the words on the page. You want to go beyond the page. And the same thing is true in music. But I did a TED Talk some years back, and I found this excerpt the best way to describe what barking at print is. What we really want to get at is, can you be spontaneous? You know, talking would be sort of spontaneous music making, like improvising, writing, having some level of understanding for that, and just expressing yourself in the moment. A lot of people associate improvising with jazz. The way we define it is your ability to be present and in the moment, and a good musician who can spontaneously interact with others. That's the start of musicianship. But for example, you could learn to read something like this. I find it to be an excellent example, because unless you study astronomy, you may not know what this says, but you could pronounce it really well. And when I do this in a situation where I can meet one of the students, I'll have them read it. But you can imagine if I were to read the units of stellar distances, the angular semi-major axis of the parallactic ellipse is called the stellar parallax of the star. Since the major axis of the ellipse is the maximum apparent angular deflection of the star as viewed from the opposite ends of a diameter of the Earth's orbit, the stellar parallax, the semi-major axis of the ellipse, is the angle at the star's distance subtended by 1 AU, perpendicular to the line of sight. Now that's a mouthful. And you may or may not know if I understand what I said. I made a couple of nicks there. I might have to go back and correct some of my pronunciation. But even if I do, if I say, let me practice saying parallactic. Oh, because I didn't say that as well as I wanted to. Or if I stumbled over a word like a semi-major axis, and I want to practice that. You can certainly do that, and it's important to speak clearly. But the idea would be to have conversation and be spontaneous and understand what you're reading. And that's where these musicianship factors come in. And that's why we want to find out what's happening for you with those things that go beyond the page. And so I hope that sort of explains it in a way. Virginia Woolf, who's a famous author, wrote a book called A Room of One's Own. And in there, she said that when you read something, and in this case, let's say you're reading music, that your mind has the potential to give birth to all kinds of ideas, all kinds of spontaneous interactions with others as they're playing other parts, and as you might play what you're playing, or you might invent another part. So what we do is have this skills exam that you can find on the web by just Googling Department of Music Teaching and Learning Musicianship Skills Assessment. It really is quite easy to find a PDF. Also, on your application in the admissions information, there is easy access to this PDF. We ask you to read rhythm patterns. We ask you to sing some tonal patterns, which are chords to songs. We ask you to read some major and minor melodies. We ask you to improvise on your primary instrument. And again, the improvisation doesn't mean you have to be an extremely experienced improviser. It means that you have to play a harmony part that goes with what's on the page, something that's not on the page. And finally, you'll harmonize a folk melody to see if you can play some simple chords on the piano to demonstrate those kinds of things that your ears are able to hear based on a melody. Oh, that goes with a 1 chord, or that goes with a 5 chord. It's nothing more complex than 1, 4, 5. So what we want to think about as you do this is, and as I would encourage you to think about this in your own musical development, interacting with what you're learning in music, trying to anticipate or predict what might come next in music. In language, you do it all the time. You can predict the next word I'm going to say, right? So in music, you could, if I was singing a song and I went, ba, 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 da, do, da, you should be able to hear, ba, and we want to make sure you have those kinds of oral skills where that's going on, where you're grouping notes into meaningful chunks and expressing them well, where you're able to compare, how's my intonation? Is it the same or not the same? How's this chord progression going? How's my rhythm? That kind of thing. And so take a song like a familiar song like Simple Gifts, which Aaron Copland uses in Appalachian Spring. And it's been set for choral and instrumental, vocal, solo, instrumental contexts throughout the history of the tune. And if you think about it, this melody, this bass line, these harmony parts are happening along the way. So we might ask you to, can you hear that goes with the tonic chord, goes with the dominant chord, those kind of things. So how do we find that out? We have you sing familiar melodies like this. Also, I wanted to show you the Appalachian Spring. This is Aaron Copland's pencil. He's writing the melody and the bass line for the song for his version of Appalachian Spring. I found his manuscript doing the same thing that I have here for you to learn. He took the time to do that himself. And what he's doing is he's taking that melody. We're asking you to take that melody and think about how do, 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 do. If you zoom out of that melody, you get bum, 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 see? And then da, 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 dee, da, 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 da. And if you zoom out of that melody, you get bum, bum, bum. And if you zoom even farther, you get bum and bum. And then, of course, the arrival note, the last note, the resting tone is bum. So here we have the same thing for rhythm. We have ba 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 ba. You also have an underlying rhythm like ba 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 ba, that kind of thing. And so you could imagine, coming back to our exam, these rhythm patterns, these tonal patterns and chords, these melodies. I'm going to click right here because I made a link to the skills assessment. Oh, well, let's open the link. And if you go to the web and scroll down, you will see just that. You'll see some rhythm patterns. And we'd like you to move your body when you do the rhythm patterns, where you keep a beat, much like a drummer would keep a beat, and you would chant. Ba, 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 and chant some rhythms in duple, chant some rhythms in triple. You would do these chords I was just talking about, 1, 4, 5 chords in major, 1, 4, 5 chords in minor, and you just sing and outline the chords like that. Then there's some sight reading you'll do. These melodies all, I think, are pretty approachable, and I would practice with your teacher or with your friends, just the ability to spontaneously read. So you will sing a melody in major for us. You'll sing a melody in minor for us. And this is a spontaneous example of your musicianship because we know what you've prepared. And now we're trying to find out, well, what kind of spontaneous musicianship can you make? We'll put you at ease. We'll make sure you feel very comfortable doing this. We're really trying to help you do your best. Your success is what we're after. Finally here, there's the improvisation part. There's simple folk songs, simple songs that you may be familiar with. You can choose the song and you would play the melody on your major instrument and then play something that goes with it, some kind of harmony part or an improvisation that you think would sound good with it. And then finally, on the piano, you would take a simple song and play 1, 4, 5 chords with the song. For example, if I go back to Simple Gifts, if that's one of the ones you chose, it would look like this. It would have the melody with no chord changes written on the top. You would play the melody in the right hand and then play simple block chords in the left hand. Now, if you're a piano player, you can play more elaborate things, but just basic functional piano is all we're listening for. And again, 1, 5, 1, 1, 4, 5, 1. So that's sort of an overview of why we do the musicianship skills and what will be on there. And if you go to that link on the web, or if you find it in the application materials, that gives you things to practice and a sample of what will have happen when you come well, actually, when you do it, you're going to do it on the online. I'm in the habit of saying when you come to audition, but Matthew will inform you about how this works, but you'll do it and we'll record it when you do it on the virtual, on the online environment. So I hope that's helpful, and maybe hopefully not too elaborate, but also not too quick of an explanation. In general, I think that helps you understand the kinds of things that we're looking for. To recap, it's this musicianship skills, an interview for you to have an exchange and a dialogue with us, and of course, performing on your primary instrument and voice.
Thank you, Chris. That's great. You know, I have to say, having seen you do that also live and in person, if any of you ever have the opportunity, it's fun because he gets everybody singing and involved. So you're off the hook tonight, but
Right.
yeah, that was very helpful. I'm going to bring in a question now that ties to curriculum, and the way the question was asked by Barathan is about when the student teaching experience comes in. But I thought it might be helpful to also sort of lead up to that a little bit. You know, what is the training that happens in the curriculums that is specifically directed at preparing the student to go into the classroom, and then does that classroom experience happen?
Yeah, no, that's terrific. So it is a process that happens over the course of your whole experience at Eastman. And it begins with you taking the introduction to music teaching and learning with me. I teach that class, and other methods classes and instrument classes that are part of the requirements. And as you're learning the concepts that are involved in those classes, you're doing observation and field experience right from the start. And so we give you experiences where you first are doing some observation, and then you would ultimately be in front of students and teaching. And that's an evolution and something that happens as you progress through your degree. And you'll do something like 100 or 150 hours of field experience observations before you student teach. And then you'll student teach in your last year of Eastman. There's a couple of ways you can do that. A lot of our majors, I would say most of them are double majors. And many of them take advantage of, it's not required, but they take advantage of something we call the Forte program, where you get a 9th semester of school to student teach with free tuition. And the whole concept of that semester is for student teaching, which opens up the rest of your curriculum for all the other requirements that you would have more time for, especially as a double major. Now, some people do it in 4 years. They don't do the 9th semester, but we're very excited about having that 9th semester where you can have your 8 semesters of Eastman, do your performance requirements and your music education requirements in those 8 semesters. And in that 9th semester, you focus on your student teaching. Or what happens is that you just do it in your last semester of school, and all the curriculum works toward that culminating experience, having prepared you with all of the music education classes. There's classes that involve sort of the pedagogy part, what we call the methods, the techniques for teaching, planning for lessons, things like that, instrument and voice classes that are necessary depending on your major. Those all happen in the first 4 years, and then student teaching happens in that last semester of your experience.
That's great, thank you. There's another question from a current undergraduate student. And we mentioned that we do have graduate degrees in music education as well. She's asking, this is Hannah, she's asking about the prerequisite for the techniques classes, right? So these are the methods classes, essentially, I think, in the different instrument areas. So she's wondering how many of those prerequisite technique classes you need to take. Do they need to be in multiple instruments, and do private lessons taken during undergrad count, essentially?
Right. So that's unique to each student. We tailor it for every student's needs. To avoid confusion, so we call those classes instrument classes, And then we call the classes where you learn more about the pedagogy and the curriculum things, we call those the methods classes. So I know that's different usage, different places, but that's how we refer to it. And those instrument classes are based on your individual needs. For example, let's say you already play the clarinet and your primary instrument is trumpet, but you already play the clarinet really well or in a solid way. You would play for the professor of that class or the instructor of that class. They would diagnose your skills, and perhaps you would just not take the class, and we would call it that you would proficiency out of that class, that it would go on your transcript that yes, you have the sufficient ability on that instrument. But it's done when you get to school. We have you interact with the different instructors of those classes, just to make sure not only that you can play the instrument, but that you can also begin to diagnose and help others in rehearsals and in lessons for beginners or rehearsals for more advanced ideas. For example, can you give somebody feedback on their embouchure and their hand position and their instrument position, and do that in a way that seems clear? So that's part of the proficiency as well. I would think that if you were playing at some level of skill that you would be able to do that. And many students who have those skills are able to proficiency and not have to take the actual class. Having said that, some students think of them, particularly woodwind players that I have as my advisees. I advise jazz majors who double major. And many of them who are saxophone players are required to double. That means they have to play flute, clarinet, and saxophone as a professional musician in a big band or in a Broadway show or something. And so let's say they take private lessons in some of those instruments, but they really want to just get a head start on some of the instruments. So they really value those instrument classes because they can get a head start on that and think of it creatively. A lot of composers take those classes because then they would, let's say they have to write an arrangement or write a composition. And it's nice to feel what it's like to have an instrument and play it so that you know more practically what the range is and things like that. So there's a lot of individual needs that we try to satisfy with the students. But I guess the short answer is that if you have those skills, there's ways to work toward making sure that you're in the right place and the right class.
Right. This is, I mean, so that's an undergraduate requirement for us too, right? So we have all of these methods classes and in the different instrument areas.
That's right. It is important for me to say, though, if you do want to take private lessons or secondary instruments, you do have to play at a certain level to do that. And there's an audition day for that. Once you get to school, you would play for those folks that audition you just to see where you are with that, because they do require certain proficiency for the private or at least the secondary lessons. I mean, you can find a private teacher to teach you, obviously, but if you want it to be part of your curriculum, I hope that's not confusing to you, that if you want to do a secondary instrument, there is an audition process just so we see and hear what your level of proficiency is. So that's another whole question, but certainly something that's doable.
Right. And that is a question I get from a lot of prospective music education students is you know, that they often have a background on another instrument and they're wondering, you know, where do I audition on that second instrument? Where do I put that on my resume? How do I convey to you that I have these skills? And so we always want to reassure that you're, of course, auditioning on your primary instrument. And it's great to list, you know, other experience that you have with other instruments or singing on your resume. But to also know that there is this process for, you know, demonstrating your proficiency level, as it were, towards the degree requirement.
Yeah, and I think it's an important thing to underline, and I think it's worth repeating that you want to focus on your primary instrument to get into Eastman.
Right.
And then when you get to Eastman, that's when you can speak to me or any of your advisors. You will have a if you're in our department, you have a personal advisor that will answer all these questions for you and help you navigate all of that. But that's when you want to think about that. And you put it on your resume, mention it in the interview that, you know, hey, I can play this instrument well. But just keep in mind that when you're auditioning at Eastman, you want to focus on and choose an instrument that will be your primary instrument.
Right, exactly. That's very important to emphasize. Along those lines, we have a question from a singer who happens to be transgender. And so they're just wondering about, you know, what that would look like in the audition scenario? And I'm happy to tackle that one. I just want to read the original question and make sure I'm covering it.
Yeah.
So we've certainly had at Eastman singers who, I mean, the important thing in the area of voice is always that you're singing in the range that is most natural for your voice. That's what the voice faculty will want to hear. We've certainly had auditioning students who are singing in a range that is not the range that would be identified with their birth gender or the gender assigned at birth. So that's nothing new to us. We want you to be comfortable in the audition scenario. I would encourage anybody who's unsure about how, or how they're going to present their audition or how we would perceive that to be in touch with us at the admissions office, and we can certainly talk to you about that. But I do want to assure the person asking that question that is something that we have experienced, and it's not a major issue. The main underlying thing is to choose, and this really goes for everybody, is to choose repertoire that represents you well, that sits comfortably in your voice range if you're a singer, and that is well within your technical capabilities.
Yes.
You have to meet the audition requirements. So you have to look at what those pieces are for each area. Some of them are very specific and some of them are more general. All of them, for the classical performance area will of course be from the classical repertoire, but we do have a jazz major as well. So just make sure you review those requirements. And if you have any concerns about any element of your audition, just be in touch with the admissions office. So I do thank you for asking that question. We have another question about the instrument classes. This is from Matt. And it says, I'd imagine that these instruments are available to rent use throughout the years that you take these classes. We don't expect everybody to show up with their case of their U-Haul truck of instruments.
Yeah.
So yeah, when you learn how to play the oboe as a trombone major, we do have an instrument office that rents those
Yes,
instruments.
we have a very well stocked instrument office, and the person who manages that office is terrific, and you will have no worries finding instruments at all. They are provided for you.
I just said oboe, and I just have to mention too, when we are open for visitors, which we're not right now, sadly, it seems like inevitably the oboe methods class is happening just down the hall from the admissions office. And I always feel the need to point out that these are not oboe majors at Eastman. Right. So, and it's also worth pointing that out to visitors because,
yeah.
Think of Eastman as, these hallowed halls and this great performance school, which of course it is. But we also have the spaces where it's, you're allowed to learn how to play an instrument that you have not played before.
That's such a great point, Matthew. I just want to chime in on that. The two things I think of is always good to be a beginner at something, but the person teaching that methods course is quite an artist. This semester, she's obviously we're in this situation we're in, but last year, Ji-Wan was also teaching that class. She's a DMA student, but professional, high level artist musician. I mean, Professor Kilmer, would describe her as an artist. And so that's the magic of Eastman, that you want to remember that the George Eastman's philosophy was for the enrichment of community life. And we all need each other that way. I guess that's a little bit, almost makes me smile when that's down the hall from the admissions office, but it actually presents a really, it's an opportunity to describe what goes on. But I just wanted to mention that that's the kind of situation. You have Ji-Wan in that room working with students who are just learning how to do it. So
it's also another example of just kind of the juxtaposition at Eastman of high level performance studies. There are PhD theory students roaming the hallways. Well, they're mostly in the library, but musicology, ethnomusicology. There are degrees now at the graduate level in film scoring and arts leadership, music leadership. All of these things happening under the same roof. And even within the performance area, you know, people who are more focused on chamber music or orchestral music or new music. And it's, you know, Chris, you were talking earlier about what sort of distinguishes the music teaching and learning program, and it bled into what distinguishes Eastman. But this is another thing, I think, that, I mean, you and I could probably talk for hours about those things, but, you know, one of them is just all of these things happening together under the same roof. And it just winds up being this community of people that, you know, not everybody is very narrowly focused on the same goal, you know. Some of the violinists want to be the concertmaster of the New York Phil, but not all of them, you know. So they want to start their own chamber groups, or, you know, start a new music ensemble, or teach primarily. And so we have all of these different pathways that our students are following. And I think it really does contribute to what we like to describe as a kind of fiercely supportive environment, where you see the students going to each other's concerts and supporting each other, playing on each other's projects. And that just, I'm mentioning all of that kind of as a lead-in to another question for you, Chris, about just your own experience as a student at Eastman, and how that informs, you know, what you're doing now professionally and in your
Yeah, that's
teaching.
a terrific question, and it's humbling in many ways, because I find Eastman to be that place where such a rich community of people and students that it's a great place to learn. And, you know, we were talking about that methods or that instrument class while those folks are learning to play the oboe, but for every student, there's a high level, let's say, trumpet player learning to play the oboe, but he's playing trumpet at an extremely high level, interacting with other students. And so that's the kind of thing that is going to be, I think, exciting for students who are there, as well as the fact that there's a whole lot of really smart people that go to Eastman, just really fun, not only to be with, but stimulating to speak with. And so when I went to school at Eastman, I knew it was for me after my first class there, because I felt like I could express myself as a piano player and as a teacher, as somebody who wanted to study and learn more about teaching and learning. I was always curious about, how do you learn to read music? How do you learn to improvise? I've always been interested in how that works. Not only does that curiosity inform my own growth, but I am in a position to help others as they're learning. And that's really what I mean when we're talking about teaching and learning. So Eastman provided for me a place where I could begin to, as a grad student now, I started to begin to think about this idea about improvisation more seriously, because I was noticing that there was a way maybe we could do a better job of helping students learn how to improvise and not be so afraid of it. And not just, it's certainly part of jazz, but even in jazz, sometimes, maybe some of you played in a jazz band but didn't improvise that much. How can we make this a little more accessible and approachable? Well, at Eastman, I was able to study in music education. I actually took theory classes and history classes, and my final projects were about improvisation. And I got to the point at Eastman where I was playing in the Eastman Jazz Ensemble. I substituted for sophomore theory as a graduate student because I was connected to one of the theory professors who liked my style, so he had me sub for him. And I was teaching a couple of classes as a doctoral student, taking my classes as a doctoral student, studying all these jazz classes with the jazz professors. So at one point, people didn't know what my major was really. It was just, they knew that I was a musician and curious and interested in all these things. I was performing and teaching and studying, you know, my subjects. And I loved that about Eastman. I just felt like, wow, what a resource, what a place to interact with people. I pulled out a book from one of my history professors. Just last week, I was doing some research on how Handel taught improvisation. All right, I was curious about that. And part of my work is to help people who play classical music to improvise. Anyway, I opened up the front of this book that I studied with Dr. Mann. Alfred Mann was his name. And he inscribed the book, and it just stopped me. And I thought, wow, this is terrific. Alfred Mann took the time to say, I'm really glad that you're enthusiastic about this topic. I hope this book is a good resource for you. And I just, thought back to those days and remember them with such fondness because it's such a rich place. You would think, here's a musicologist, again, working in this place called Eastman, where all these folks come together to make something great. I hope that sort of gives you one example. I could give you so many examples. I mean, when I was a student, I worked with Rayburn Wright and Bill Dobbins, who was on the faculty back when I was a student. He's still on the faculty now. And a lot of people in music education, still are in touch. We have professors and emeritus professors that are still in touch. So the community remains vibrant and exciting. So you can tell I get animated about it because I'm excited about the place.
That's great. You and me both. That does there are a couple of questions I want to get to, but given the track we're on right now, I want to follow this thought, and then we'll come back to these other questions. But you've been talking about your experience as a student and then how it led to your what you're doing professionally now and teaching. What about just some other examples of alumni who went through the music education program at Eastman and are out there now doing things? I mean, certainly, virtually any alum who actively pursued a teaching job in music is teaching in music. So there's more examples of that than we can point to.
Right.
Are there some that sort of stand out for you?
Well, one thing you have to remember about Eastman in particular, we're actually positioned very well to take care of, is that students who graduate from Eastman find themselves in all kinds of musical jobs. And most musical jobs, not all, but most musical jobs, and have some element of teaching. So, for example, we have alumni who play, one of my recent alumni is now a piano player in the Airmen of Note. His name is Chris Ziemba, and he teaches privately, and his wife, Lauren Yu, is a bassoon player who's teaching. And they have a nice life in the DC area. Somebody that comes to mind that's on the undergraduate level is Alexa Tarantino, who, after graduating from Eastman with a music education and jazz degree, she went on to Juilliard to study saxophone. And Thursday night, I'll give a plug to her, Thursday night, the 5th of November, she's playing with Wynton Marsalis on a concert down in New York City at Dizzy's Club. So that's one of our alumni. That's a student that majored in music education and jazz studies. One more example might be someone like Brendan Lanahan, who's a trombone player. He's graduated from Eastman. I thought of him because he also went down to Juilliard and studied trombone. Now he's teaching, and he played for many months, if not over a year, with a big band on the road. Pretty sure it was the Glenn Miller Orchestra. They have a band, what you might call a ghost band, that toured. But he also he's from the Buffalo area. Which reminds me of another alum who has a doctorate from Eastman. His name is Steve Schuin. If I could make a bunch of Steve Schuins, I would be very happy, because Steve Schuin is a phenomenal music teacher, and he's a band director in Williamsville, New York. And we have so many students that come to Eastman. I should say this to Matthew. Many students come to Eastman out of Steve's music program. Jeremy Condrat, I know that Jeremy's daughter is in the session tonight. He's one of our proud alumni. He's in Plano, Texas. He's a terrific musician, trombone player, conductor, music teacher in Plano, Texas. And I've been down to Plano many times. I've actually interacted with that community many times. Also, on the graduate level, we have master's and doctoral students I could speak of as well, who get jobs in colleges, university professors. We also have people who are playing in orchestras. People are on the West Coast doing things, people on the East Coast, people in the Midwest, people in China, people in Japan. Todd Lowry, I'll give you one more example and then I'll stop, because you could go on and on. Todd Lowry is graduated from Eastman, very entrepreneurial guy, and he started a music program using curriculum he learned at Eastman through me and my colleague Dick Bruno. Started a school, and now that school has expanded to K through 12. It's called the GKA, Gunma Prefecture has a school. It's a school where they learn English in the context of all their subjects. but he's got a tremendously successful jazz series as well as his teaching life. Really successful graduate. And then, of course, it's hard to stop because it's hard not to stop because, or it's hard to stop. I guess that's what I should say, because we have many people out there, in all these positions that involve teaching and learning in some capacity, either in a public school or a community school or in a private studio situation. Most musicians, when they graduate, are going to teach, and we like to say that in our department that they're well prepared to be successful. So I hope I didn't give too many examples, Matthew, but I get excited about that.
No, please. With the dog barking in the background, I was glad to have you
Yeah.
keep going. But all great examples too, and I think illustrates the kind of education that we do.
Yeah.
We do provide.
And those of you out there, if you ever see this recording, if I left you out,
It's always the danger when you start listing our alumni. There's just so many who are doing so many amazing things. You can't possibly mention them all.
That's right.
That's
so right.
It's an important disclaimer. Okay, we're gonna jump to just catching up now on the Q&A. And if you have a question that you've been thinking about and you haven't yet jumped in and typed it in, please go ahead and do so. But we have a question about going back to the skills assessment, whether or not you require particular syllables, movable do or that kind of thing.
That's a really good question because it is pertinent to a lot of pedagogy. We want you to use whatever system makes you the most successful and the most comfortable. Now, when you come to Eastman, we have you engaged in various systems, and professors have the systems they like. But when you audition and take these exams, you do what works for you so that you're successful. In fact, when you're in the situation, when you're in the Zoom or the virtual environment, it's okay to ask if you can try that again and maybe try it with a different system, or right, so that you don't have to feel like, oh, I messed that up. I don't, you could say, I nicked that right there. Can I try that again just to show you that I could get a little bit better at it? So it's the kind of thing that we want your success, so you can use whatever system helps you to be the best you.
That's great. So if I came in and just wanted to sing on law,
right,
you would like to do that. Yeah.
Yep.
That's great.
You can do that. In fact, that's one of the things. Law, a lot of people like to use, for example, if you're a wind player, they'll use like do 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 do, like a sound that might be similar to what they might do if they were articulating. There's lots of ways.
Right. Great. A couple of questions from prospective graduate applicants, which I think actually are also pertinent. I think for our undergraduate prospective students to be thinking ahead.
Yeah.
The master's degree, once you get that teaching job, master's degree of some kind becomes important in many cases to get your permanent certification. The first one is about a student who's recently graduated with an undergraduate degree and will be applying to the program in music education. Wondering what qualities we look for, especially with a student who's only had a little bit of real-world teaching experience.
Right. Well, that's a very important concept that we can wrap our head around in a way that just demonstrates you being the best you. And how I ended the last segment. When I was auditioning and applying to graduate school, I did the as a piano player. Before coming to Eastman, I was playing piano in the Washington, D.C. area, and I was actually teaching in the public schools. I had some teaching experience. So my MO was that I had 5 years of teaching experience. I was already playing at a level that was worthy of a master's degree, and went to Eastman that way. Now, another scenario that's equally valid is somebody who wants to get the master's now, and they are at the top of their game with how they're playing. They really are curious so that they can get that accomplished, so that when they do start their professional life, they don't have to stop that to go back to school. The reason I mentioned both those tracks is because we have both a summers only master's degree, and then we have a full-time residency master's degree. So if you're coming full-time right out of undergrad or with a limited amount of teaching experience, when we interview you, we'll just ask you for experiences you've had with others. How have you interacted with others? And we sort of get a barometer for your maturity as a human interacting with others. And maybe you could tell us a story about working with a sibling, or maybe there was a situation in your life, in your community or your church or your school. Maybe you did a sectional, or maybe you were a drum major, or maybe when you were in undergraduate school, you were in charge of the clarinet section or something. Any questions like that would help us understand more of that part of you that shows and demonstrates those experiences. So I hope that answers it okay, because I also wanted to embrace the idea that if you did have experience, that's cool. But if you haven't yet, we also have many students. You will be with other students like that. And then you'll intermingle and learn from each other.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it really reinforces the idea that people come into these, especially our graduate programs, from lots of different backgrounds and, you know, different experiences, and there's not sort of one pathway, especially when we start getting into the graduate degrees.
That's right. And I should say also, we have at the graduate level an MM and an MA.
Right.
We have many programs at Eastman that are valuable. The MA doesn't mean you don't play an instrument. It just means that you're deciding to do a little more research for your requirement, and there isn't an audition requirement. You can still obviously engage musically. The MM, though, requires an audition and the whole thing there.
Right, great. And you also mentioned the Summers Only program, and that is actually what our other question is about. Elise is asking, is there anything she should be aware of when preparing for the Summers Only program as opposed to the regular school year program?
It's the same. The difference is actually just when you're at Eastman in this case, or when you, if you do it online, when do you take the classes? And they're offered at a time when, obviously in the summer, where you wouldn't have to quit a job or that kind of thing. When it's called the Summers Only, but it's a little misleading because you can actually do some stuff during the year, but you do it from from home. But the audition requirements are the same for both, and we love interacting with you along with everybody else who auditions, and then you just choose to do your work summers, and or you could choose to do it during the year too. I mean, you ultimately have to make that decision, but it's the same process.
So we have caught up on the questions. We've gotten some great information out of Professor Zera. So I'll just take a moment to see if there are any last questions. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to just plop a link into the chat, which is a link to our newly updated admissions experience page. Typically, this is our Visit Eastman page. Not able to host visitors on campus these days. We've sort of revamped that web page. So there's a video tour, which is essentially a full-length tour. It's about a 15-minute video. It's not a quick video, but it'll take you through all of the facilities. It's led by students, a couple of whom are actually double majors in, well, let's see, Grace is on there, right? So she's jazz, saxophone, and music education.
Yeah.
And there's 3D photography of the performance halls, opportunities to sign up for one of our admissions information sessions. So if you have other questions, you know, related to specifically music teaching and learning, or just about the admissions process in general, you can sign up for one of our weekly info sessions. And we have more webinars coming. It's kind of webinar season, since we're typically traveling around and trying to meet up with you, the students, at various college fairs and arts high schools. Now, of course, we can't do that, but you know, one major advantage to this format is that we're able to see, as we saw when you introduced yourselves, students from throughout New York State, but also Texas and Georgia, all over the country. And that's just great. So there are no geographical barriers to what students we get to come into contact with this year. So there is another webinar tomorrow night with Mark Kellogg, who's the chair of our Winds Brass Percussion Department. So he'll be talking about that. There are other ones coming up related to chamber music, piano department. We've done one already with the voice department. That recording will be available soon if it's not already. I have to double check. So check our website, check the experience page, and keep in touch is kind of the bottom line. So Chris, with that, I'm gonna take us out with just one last question.
Yeah.
Sophie, she's asking, this is about the interview for the graduate teaching and learning process. And you might touch on this for the undergrad too. It's just which faculty are present during those interviews?
We are all present. We are all available and all present. When things happen live, you come to our area of the school and you are interviewing with one particular person. Basically, that would be the person that lines up with your area of focus. And then that person might even end up being your advisor, but not always. But anyway, typically we're interviewing folks in our area of expertise, but you're with everybody. Now, during these times of COVID and the virtual experience, you will have an opportunity. You will be interviewing with a professor, and so all of the professors. The great thing about Eastman is that all the professors do the auditions. All the professors teach both undergrad and graduate courses. We're invested in the entire process, and we're really proud of that. So you can tell I'm expressing that with a lot of energy because I think that's something that I hope you value.
Right, that's fantastic. And those areas of expertise basically outline the program of, the instrumental program, the vocal, and the general music program.
Right, so we have what we call MEI, which is music education instrumental, MEV, which is music education vocal choral, and MEG, which is music education general. We also have the double major in JCM, which is the jazz majors and music education. So it's a rich community of students.
Right, and not at all scary because you've met Professor Azera now, and everybody else in the faculty is, at least as nice as him, if not nicer.
So, yeah, right. Tell me about it. Before we leave each other, I wanted to say to everybody that my enthusiasm for Eastman is sincere and rich. I hope you felt some of that during our interaction. That really, the greatest thing that I can imagine saying about the whole process is that it's so musical. And we bring music as the highest priority, but also remember that as somebody who's just as interested in teaching and learning, I like to think that one of the ways I express it is that we all have gifts inside. And a teacher is somebody who can wake up the gifts that are sleeping and bring them out. And that's really the way I like to think about the interactions you're going to have at Eastman, that we have a lot of professors, a lot of folks in our department, but even obviously across the school who are excited to meet you and work with you as you have your musical journey.
It's fantastic and a great place to end. Think of the admissions process, going through, the application and the interview and the audition. It's all part of this learning process, learning about yourself, learning about us. So yeah, don't be intimidated by it. Just open yourself up to it, and we'll guide you through it. So thank you, Professor Azera. Thank you all of you for tuning in, and thank you to those of you watching after the fact with the recording. We're glad you spent some time with us, and we look forward to hearing from you again. So have a great night, everybody.
Good night.
Bye-bye.